All right, you guys ready? Calling to order the regular meeting of the Planning Commission for Wednesday, January 26th. Jackie, could you take roll, please?
Here.
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 Here. Here. Yep, Commissioner Carpenter is here as well. Let the record show he was a little bit almost here, mostly here. Before we get going in the meeting, I just wanted to say that tonight is the last meeting for two of our commissioners. Commissioner Risser has resigned and is, but for good reason. She's been, for most people, I think we all know this, but she's been serving on two commissions, the Energy and Environment and Planning, and she's resigning from Planning and will solely be an Energy and Environment Commissioner, doing lots of work on that commission. So, and we'll have a little bit of discussion on this later, but I just wanted to alert everyone. And then, of course, Commissioner Brown, who has reached the end of his terms. How many years have you been on here? 11 years. We have a 9-year term limit, so obviously his last term he snuck in there somehow and got a couple extra years out. But we'll have a discussion later in the meeting, but I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention that we have to defer to them on most decisions tonight. So not really.
Why should anything change now?
Right. So the first item is approval of minutes. And that was our Planning Commission meeting of December 1st, 2010. Do we have any proposed changes to the minutes? It was a long time ago. Do we have a second? We have a motion to approve the minutes and a second. Any comments? Otherwise, all in favor, say aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. Thank you. Next item is actually old business, and it is our only business tonight is old business, and it's really the work we're continuing on our zoning update committee. We did meet in a work session last week and focused primarily on our, if you look at the process tracker, as most of you know, the City Council has approved a number of ordinance revisions that we made over the last few months, and so we now have PUD in our ordinance. We have the conditional use standards. We have the text amendments. We have non-conforming uses, a number of them that we were actually waiting on. We were waiting to see what happened with those ordinance items before we got into many of the issues in the development review process. Now, we have discussed these issues, but we haven't brought them forward just for a final decision until we knew where we were going to be on the other issues, especially PUD. So the goal tonight is to go through these issues and make a final recommendation that we will then send along to the City Council to get these elements completed. So that is our work tonight. And I think we'll start out. Now, just you all got revised minutes from our meeting from our January 19th meeting, and those are in front of you. And I believe Mr. Teague actually emailed them to all of you as well. It was Jackie had done the minutes after the meeting, but this is a difficult type. These work sessions are actually difficult for staff because they don't have the opportunity. They can't go back and watch the film, right, to check what was said. So it's real time, and Jackie had only a day really to get the minutes done and out. So what we got initially, I just went through and made some edits based on my recollections. So feel free to, if you see something that's not what you thought you said or heard, make sure you let us know.
Use the version that's in front of us, the one that incorporates the edits that you made.
Correct. The one that was on
the desk tonight.
Yep. So take the other ones and throw them away or something, and just use the ones that you have before you. So what I'm going to propose is that we dive right into it, starting with the role of the Transportation Commission in the development review process. Carrie, do you want to give an overview of where we are?
Certainly. I can give a quick overview and we can get into the discussion. In an effort to try to streamline the development review process, the Zoning Ordinance Update Committee has been considering the responsibility of the Transportation Commission and how the review of a transportation portion of a development proposal fits in. And what we've been considering is trying to streamline that process, make it more clear for the public. We oftentimes at Planning Commission hear confusion from the public. What meeting do they go to ask questions in regard to the transportation? So with that, the Zoning Ordinance Committee had recommended that the Planning Commission be the body that reviews the traffic study. We would have the city engineer and the engineering consultants, and we can answer all those questions at that meeting, which is the official, or one of the official public hearings. So it's one less meeting that a resident or a developer would have to attend, so it's not quite as confusing. So with that, I can turn it back to the commission for discussion.
So we discussed this, we've discussed it many times over the last year and a half to 2 years. We actually had a recommendation, if you recall, kind of our preliminary recommendation was to eliminate the role of the Transportation Commission in the development review process. At that time, the chair of the Transportation Commission and Commissioner Bonneville attended one of our meetings and asked us to just hold on that recommendation. They wanted to have more dialogue about it. There's been a lot of dialogue about this. Where we are currently is, we kind of came back around. There's new leadership on the Transportation Commission, and frankly, there's been a lot of discussion at the Transportation Commission, at the City Council level, a lot of discussion in our city about the work that, the plentiful work that there is for a Transportation Commission, whether it's looking at just how pedestrians are moving around our community, the different modes of transportation, a lot of things versus having them, doing the same kind of review we're doing on actual projects. So in our work session the other night, we did agree to bring forward to this body a recommendation that the Transportation Commission be eliminated from the development review process unless we decide as a planning commission or the council decides to make a specific referral to them, to have them look at a special project or something that we think needs to be looked at. And then, of course, we could, as we do with the Energy and Environment Commission already, the chair of that commission could certainly get our packet so they're aware and up to speed at the projects we're looking at. So if they so chose, they could certainly send information to us prior to our meeting. But they don't have a formal role in the process is what we'd be recommending. So with that, I will take any comment, any discussion, or even a motion if we're all in agreement to just make that the recommendation.
So are you trying to define the role of what the Transportation Commission then is, as far as what they work on, or is that just something that will be determined at a later date? You're just trying to take it out of the development process?
Yeah, I don't think it's our role to define what their role should be, and in fact, they're way down that road, no pun intended. I think they have a whole lot of things they're focusing on, and very much more forward-thinking elements. There's been some discussion about, we've heard the term complete streets. There are a lot of those kind of things, healthy community design, all of this stuff that has transportation focus to it, and I think there will be a lot of effort in that direction. And I can't speak to exactly where they're going to go, but fairly confident that they've got a lot to do. Commissioner Staunton?
I'm supportive of this change. I think this is a good change. I think that, we have experienced on many occasions development applications that have come to us as a planning commission, and we encounter a transportation traffic issue, and our city engineer isn't here because our city engineer was at the Transportation Commission meeting. The developer's engineer isn't here because they were at the Transportation Commission meeting, and we're left kind of not knowing how to deal with it. And perhaps more importantly, members of the public, I think if we make this change, we'll know that a development application will be reviewed at the Planning Commission, and that's an important, clear signal to send to folks that if you want to see the review of development application, you should come to the Planning Commission. I also like the idea of circulating our agendas or development application, some kind of notice to the Transportation Commission chair, and certainly they're welcome to come to the meeting or send something in writing or discuss it at a meeting before it gets to us if for some reason the application is going to be crosswise with some issues that they think are important from a transportation perspective. So with that, I would make a motion that we approve this recommendation.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion from Commissioner Staunton and a second from Commissioner Brown. Just to add just a bit of discussion here before we take a vote. One of the discussion points we had last week was I have talked to the chair of the Transportation Commission, and I invited her to come to the meeting. We had a very good discussion, and she's comfortable with our recommendation we're making. There's not unified voice on the Transportation Commission. There are members of that commission that would like to still be doing development review, but it's not. So she didn't feel comfortable coming and speaking for the commission, which I understand completely. But she did express some concerns that there are things that we should be looking at. The whole, there's a document, and I don't have it in front of me right now. Carrie, do you remember the name of it? It's our policy on, there's some initials there, but it's the Transportation Impact Analysis.
Yeah, it lists what needs to go into a traffic
It's
study.
the criteria that a developer would look at to know when and what and how they're supposed to bring something forward. And the chair of the Transportation Commission feels that could use some updating. So one of the things we have to realize is that we're now, and for a couple of us that have been here a while, a few of us that have been here a while, the Planning Commission used to do all of this review. This isn't a new thing. And then when the Transportation Commission was formed, that duty went over to them, and so now we're just bringing it back. But it is going to change. We're going to ask that we have staff here that deal with transportation issues in our city, and we're going to ask, of course, that the consultants are here to answer our questions. So that will be a positive change. But then it is incumbent on us to make sure that we're following up on things like what is the policy and what is that process. So we'll just have to be taking on some of those issues. So that's all I have. Any other comments before we take a vote? Just to make sure, did anybody here have any concerns or comments to make on this issue? Okay. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. He jumped on it.
So Mike, as a follow-up to that, is there going to be a distribution of the policy that we're supposed to be following?
We will, when we start taking this on, I'll get out the information or have staff get everything out to you. And
Okay.
so we have to obviously get into the groove of the kinds of things we should be asking and doing. The next item, if I can keep it in order here, I believe is the variance review process. Am I right, Carrie?
Correct. Yeah, this next one is the result of the 2008 lawsuit with the district, the project at Centennial Lakes, where the city lost the lawsuit in regard to the variance process. Previously to that lawsuit, residential variances were reviewed by the Zoning Board of Appeals, and any commercial project that had a variance tied to it, final action was taken by the City Council. The court case said that our Zoning Board of Appeals have to take final action on all variances. We've since amended the ordinance, so it's a little more clear. So during the last year or so, we've been discussing what's the appropriate process. Should we continue with the Zoning Board of Appeals separate from the Planning Commission? Should the Planning Commission become the Zoning Board of Appeals, or maybe even the City Council? The last time that the committee had discussed this, the item was tabled in order for the discussion regarding the PUD to take place. Since that time, we've approved and adopted the PUD ordinance. The thinking was a commercial project that has variances tied to it likely would come in under a PUD rather than a development project with variances. Also, since that time, as you know, we've had the Supreme Court case regarding Krummenacher, which makes it much more difficult for cities to approve variances. Legislature is addressing that issue, and there may be some action taken on that in the short term. But the the recommendation that we talked about at the work session last week was to keep the Zoning Board of Appeals, kind of stay the current course of action, see how the Krummenacher case plays out. We may have a run on variances if the legislature tells us to go back to business as usual. And also commercial variances, we likely won't see as many of those. They would be coming in as part of a PUD and a rezoning. Also, the residential variance review in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals works very well. It's not as intimidating for people, for applicants, being on television with the Planning Commission or City Council meeting. The process can move quickly with the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting twice a month. So it's a process that's very well received in the city today. So with that, I can turn it back to the Planning Commission for more discussion.
And I'm just going to highlight, in our discussion, we talked about three primary options that, and you know, we've probably been on each one of these for some period of time. We kind of had evolved. But what we talked about is, one, you could dissolve the Zoning Board of Appeals as we know it today and make the Planning Commission the Zoning Board of Appeals. The assumption would be that if we get back, you know, there's a variance process for all the residential variance requests, that we may have to add a meeting a month. You know, so we have 2 Planning Commission meetings a month, or we meet earlier before our meeting, or both. And then, so that's a pretty clean option. The other is to have the City Council be the Zoning Board of Appeals. You could have the Planning Commission be advisory on commercial development reviews, and our panels, the Zoning Board of Appeals panels on the residential, forwarding the recommendation to the City Council, and then they, you know, can almost do it in a consent agenda type format. What we talked about there is that for those residents who, you know, don't necessarily want to come into and it applies actually for both of these, and all of a sudden they're coming into a room, it's televised, there may be 100 people here for some other project, and they've got to present their 6-inch variance request for the garage, you know, and that's a pretty intimidating scenario for folks. And then the third option was keeping the existing process, noting the PUD's impact and a lot of things. And the more we talked about it at our meeting, the more it seemed like there's enough balls up in the air, you know, the unknowns with what's the legislature going to do, what's the impact going to be of the PUD, what's the impact of all these zoning ordinance changes that the council just approved. You know, it may change what we know. So, you know, is this the right time? In some ways, it's the right time to eliminate the Zoning Board of Appeals because they have no work. But in some ways, it might be a bad time because if the floodgates open, we may really be happy that the Zoning Boards of Appeals are there until we kind of figure out our new world order when it comes to variances. So that's where we ended up at the end of our discussion last week, was let's just let it be. But noting that, you know, we were pretty clear that on a commercial project that comes through the normal process and needs a variance, they're not doing PUD, that we'd want to make sure that the variance is being looked at between the preliminary plan review and the final plan review, that it's not going all the way through. And it was after the fact that Mr. Teague informed me that is really what we've been doing. And for some reason, it's always felt like it was much later in the process, but I think, you know, we're so thorough going through that preliminary plan review, it feels like it's pretty much, you know, through the process. So, but Mr. Teague did inform me that that is in fact the way the process is working today. So with that, I'll take any discussion. Commissioner Grable.
At one of the earlier discussions, I was not at the last committee meeting. At one of the earlier meetings we had on this topic, the idea was floated that we continue the Zoning Board of Appeals for residential variances. If somebody wants a 6-inch variance for their garage, that go before the zoning board of appeals. But variances requested or required in the bigger development projects would come to this body as the other zoning board of appeals. Since right now we've got numerous panels, I don't see why something like that couldn't be used, but I was just wondering what happened. Was that idea discussed at all? What happened to that idea?
Kerry, do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can take that. I believe that was discussed the evening that the city attorney was here, and he has, the state statutes talk about a singular zoning board of appeals. And so to have two different zoning board of appeals, one for residential, one for commercial, he wasn't comfortable with that process.
Well, how do you have different zoning boards of appeals then?
Well, we have one zoning board of appeals, but members on that board rotate. But there's one singular zoning board of appeals.
Now, he's not thrilled about that either, this rotating membership. I mean, if he had his way, that's not necessarily the way we would do it. But it's been working, and it's not necessarily something that, I think that would, he's not thrilled about it, but I think he thinks it holds up because it's still one board. The only way, Commissioner Grable, the only way to do what you're suggesting, I think, is that this concept, what we were talking about, if the council was the zoning board of appeals and you'd have the two bodies making recommendations, you could back that up. We would be the zoning board of appeals. The panels make recommendations to us, and then we take commercial, and then we take their recommendations on all the residential. But then again, it's that same problem. Now, all the folks that went to those panels would feel obligated to come back to our meeting, and are we going to do it on a consent agenda? It's kind of rolling it through twice. So it is a possibility, but I think that's the way we'd have to do it. Commissioner Brown.
I realize I'm leaving, but I guess my opinion is that one of the things that was always awkward for me on zoning board of appeals or getting the packet was almost if someone was bringing something forward, because there's different makeups of the different zoning board groups. Are they going to shop a committee? Do they know somebody? How does that work? And it provides for an inconsistency. So I appreciate that it's that it's working and it's convenient. To me, I hate to say it, I would feel again, I'm not going to be here, but I would feel better if it were a matter where you had 2 planning commission meetings in a month to keep that schedule, but that there was the continuity at the planning commission hearing all the variances, whether they were residential or commercial. Because I think that's where some of the issues end up happening with the public, and they kind of go, well, how did those guys get it approved and mine didn't? And well, that was, hey, they were with Nancy's group, they weren't with your group. And I think sometimes when you have 2 or 3 people, you're in the public's mindset, you're setting a precedent for certain decisions, and there ought to be continuity with the body that's doing it. So again, I feel like that would be better to have a continuity and having all those variances coming through one body.
So to be clear, the guy who's leaving wants us to double our meetings? No, I mean, you really do. It's a good point, very good point. Commissioner Staunton.
I share the continuity concern, and I actually think that we ought to be recommending option number 2 here, where the city council acts as the zoning board of appeals. You keep the current panels of zoning boards. They make recommendations on residential variance applications that then go to the council for final approval. That satisfies Commissioner Brown's continuity concern because the council would see all of those, and if there was some, kind of inconsistency between recommendations, they could always pull that out and make that consistent. But the driving force behind it for me is I just don't think it is workable for us to have commercial development applications that are in front of us that include variances and pretend that we're not acting on the variance and that somehow the variance is going to be acted on by a zoning board of appeals panel, and all the while recognizing that really the city council is the entity that is going to make the decision on approving that development application. And we can parse it into variances and and the conditional use permit part here and the final plan permit part here, and we're just making recommendations to the council and the zoning board is doing the variance part. The reality is it all is one application that comes to us, and again, members of the public who want to come and figure out what's happening should be able to come to one place, understand where the public hearing is, and then go to the council as well, and the council makes a decision. So I think it's a much cleaner way. I like the fact that from a volume perspective and for some of the issues the chair raised, you know, that keeping the zoning boards of appeal, those panels, allows for a little more informality with purely residential, you know, the 6-inch garage setback variance that isn't a big deal, can go through that panel, and it could be, you know, approved in a pretty summary way by the council once it gets there. I'm just really uncomfortable continuing on this really fractured process where I think anybody from the outside trying to follow an application would be really challenged. The other thing is, I am not convinced, especially if there's a change at the legislature, that we're not going to get commercial development application variance requests. I don't think every single variance request for a commercial development application will be converted to a PUD application. You could have a, you know, final plan review or site plan review, but they need a, you know, a variance for 5 feet in height or for a lot setback. They're not going to go through the entire PUD process just to try and add that to their application. And so I think, you know, when a development application comes in, we just finished talking about this with the Transportation Commission, that development application ought to come to the Planning Commission, be reviewed, and all the dimensions of it reviewed here, and then a recommendation made to the council, and then the council ought to make the decision. And I think the only way, you know, I'd love to split off the residential ones and have the zoning boards of appeal make their decisions straight away on those, but I don't think legally we can do that. I think we have to have those then be a recommendation. So I would advocate for number 2, and I don't know that, I don't see any reason we should be waiting. I think it just continues to muddy things.
Commissioner Staunton, I think you make a good point, but what makes you favor the city council being the zoning board of appeals in your scenario versus us? Why not? I'm just worried about burdening the council with more things, and their meetings are already very long. They have a ton of stuff to get through, and now we're sending kind of another big job at them.
Well, here's the rub. If we are the zoning board of appeals, then again we get this commercial development application, and we are making a final decision on the variance part of it, and then we're sending a recommendation on the remainder of it. And you know, how does the council? I mean, I think the council wants to make the final decision on the entire package when you have a commercial development application, because it's hard to split it apart into these component pieces. So I'd be all for us doing it if the council was okay with that. I just think it's a little problematic with the commercial development applications because we're kind of half deciding the case, so to speak,
Right.
before it gets to the council. And I think the council would like the full, my suspicion is they would want to make the full decision on that.
Right. Commissioner Scheer.
Question for Commissioner Staunton. So in the scenario that you're laying out, would the official public hearing take place at the council level?
Well, I think we're going to talk about that later as well. I would be in favor of one public hearing that takes place at the Planning Commission, but is then continued to the council. And I'd like to see us with those public hearings really encourage people to submit anything they want to be part of the record, the evidence, if you will, to us at the Planning Commission. Leave the argument. There can be additional comment or supplemental argument that's made in front of the City Council by members of the public who come in. But I would see the public hearing really being with us, or in the case of residential ones, with the Zoning Board of Appeals, with those panels.
Which would mean, in effect, unless the council chose to absolutely abstain from taking public comment, and their history isn't always that they are able to do that effectively, that the presenters would have multiple meetings that they would attend.
Yeah, I mean, as a practical matter, I don't think you're going to have the council refuse to hear from the public at a final meeting. And so I do think, I don't see any way you can get around the Planning Commission and the council on a quasi-judicial application process. I think both of those entities are people are going to have to show up for those two meetings if they're
But it
interested.
would occur at the residential level as well in this scenario that you're painting, potentially.
Potentially, yeah. I think that is the price of it, is that there's this extra link, and I know that concerns staff, because up until now, we've had a nice situation where twice a month we have these panels that review applications and can make a final decision right on the spot, and somebody can get going on their project. And I'd love to continue that, but it seems to me if we continue that, then we give up. We go back to this bifurcated commercial development application review process, and if I have to choose, I'd rather have them stay together.
Okay.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Where the public hearing would be for a moment. And my initial reaction to what Commissioner Brown and Commissioner Staunton are saying is that there's a lot of sense to what they're proposing. We've talked about some of that before, and there has been value to that. But my inclination is to think that we don't need to necessarily rush into that piece. We're brainstorming a little bit about whether or not there'll be more PUDs on the commercial side that might take away a lot of that. We don't really know which way that might go. Commissioner Staunton, you could well be right that we're over anticipating the value of a PUD, but I'm not so sure that we need to decide that now. We could actually play this out a little bit and see how it goes rather than rush in. This might be one of those things where maybe it's not broken, or maybe it will be broken eventually, but we don't necessarily need to decide up front without perhaps waiting to see how some of the things that we've been adopting right now play out and how that impacts the process. So from that perspective, I'm sort of inclined to think that we stick with the Zoning Board of Appeals temporarily at least, and monitor what the impact is of the PUD process and assess somewhere down the road here, whether it's a few months or a year or whatever, to determine whether or not it's beneficial to remove move the variance process up to the Planning Commission or the City Council or whatever. But I just don't know that we have it's that immediately pressing.
Other comments? Commissioner Grable.
I'm sorry, but I did not understand the argument as to why City Council should be the Zoning Board of Appeals. It just seems to me if we're going to do away with the multiple panels, it just seems to make sense to me that this would be the body that would act as the Zoning Board of Appeals. We have a development plan come before us. There's always been the tension before that, well, what if we approve the development plan and then some panel of the zoning board decides that they don't want to do the variance? Or conversely, if we approve the variance, well, I guess it wouldn't work that way. But if the variance was approved, if the development program ended up not being approved, it wouldn't make any difference if the variance was approved because it wouldn't be operative. So I just don't see the point of having. If you're going to do away with the multiple panels, it just seems to make sense to me to have this body do the whole thing.
Commissioner Staunton.
Well, I think we end up, if you have a commercial development application that comes in front of us and we're the Zoning Board of Appeals, and let's say it's got a conditional use permit, it's got a final development plan, and it's got a variance, we would make the final decision on the variance, and then we would send the recommendation on the conditional use permit and the final development plan on to the council.
Keep in mind that our ordinance currently reads that any commercial development is automatically appealed, that the variance decision is automatically appealed to the City Council, so they're automatically going to get the final say.
Well, if that's the case, then that's just if we can do it that way, that's fine. I think that's really no different than saying that the City Council is going to make the final decision on it.
True.
So if we're eliminating the panels and we're going to do them all, then that's fine with me. And we basically, I guess it would depend on whether legally we can say that there's a staff appeal or how we change it. I mean, I defer to Roger's opinion on it, but it sure sounds to me like we're doing a different zoning board of appeals for the commercial than from the residential if we do it that way. If we can do it that way, then I think that's great. And I get your point, Commissioner Grable, that, you know, why create more work for them if they don't want to deal with the residential ones? I'd be fine with doing it that way too.
I mean, I do think the point that was made, now I can't remember if it was Commissioner Grable or Commissioner Brown, but this idea that that the council, or maybe it was Commissioner Staunton, that the council can look at all of the variances that are approved and see if there's sort of a consistency or inconsistency. I think that should be our job. You know, the idea of burdening the council with that kind of review, that means it's not simply a cursory, vote. They're going to have to really dig into that information in their packets. It's going to add a lot of time. And so I think we're better off doing that at this level, which is sort of our job. But Mr. Teague, how does, like currently the way our ordinance is written, I mean, do you recall what our city attorney has said about that? Is he comfortable with the fact that there's this automatic referral to the, or appeal to the council?
He is comfortable with that. So anytime there's a variance tied to a commercial development, city council is going to take final action on that. Other cities I've worked for, when, say, the planning commission is the zoning board of appeals, if a variance is tied to a commercial development application, that decision again is automatically appealed to the city council. So under really any scenario, if there's a commercial development project with a variance tied to it, city council is going to end up taking final action on that application.
I think when we entered this process, part of the issue was to simplify for the public what we were doing and eliminate some of the, hocus pocus perception of, well, it got approved here, it didn't get approved there, and why did that happen? And to me, when you have everything running through one channel, you're going to get at least continuity of that current commission for a period of time, and it will change more gradually than having four distinct groups that might view things differently. So I would just reiterate that point.
So, back to I'm just going to throw this scenario out again where, let's say that the planning commission is the zoning board of appeals. We've already talked about that on a commercial development, we're going to make our decision one way or another. It's automatically appealed to the council, so that process is intact. On the residential ones, rather than us taking, adding another meeting a month and hearing all of those and putting citizens in that position of kind of having to be at potentially some, very well-attended meetings doing their residential variance requests, we could still have the panels do their thing, make their recommendations to us. Now we're the body that looks to make sure there's consistency and all of that. And then, so we could choose to make it more or less a consent agenda item. I think that might make sense. Commissioner Forrest.
We talk about the intimidating factor, and I follow that along. Then I started thinking, would that particular meeting, if it's dedicated only to variances, necessarily be broadcast? Currently, our zoning boards of appeal panels are not broadcast, in our zoning ordinance update committee panels aren't broadcast either. So there may be the potential of having it be a little less formal if indeed we ended up going that way.
Commissioner Brown.
I'm just going to say that I think that the issue of the formality, Chris does a great job. She does the presentation for the majority of what's presented. She gives the overview. Here's the findings. In some cases, in many of the Board of Appeals situations I've been involved with, people don't say anything. And so the fact that it's televised and it's here, I don't think, they have to come to a meeting anyway. And I think to me, the trade-off is, if the public perception is, hey, there's continuity in the process, the same 9 people are hearing the argument every time, whether it's residential or commercial, and the majority of the presentation work is teed up by staff. To me, I think that's just a win all the way around. It becomes a much cleaner process. It's the same people. You're directing traffic on whether it's a commercial or residential process. There's no perception of someone shopped a commission or whatever. It just seems to me to be a lot cleaner and a lot straighter process. So, if I go back to kind of what some of the objective was when we were looking at the redrafting of the ordinances, part of it was making it clear to the public, making it easier to understand. To me, that is a no-brainer. And having it be a situation where you still have the panels and they bring the residential issues forward. I mean, I have to imagine if Chris is sitting there presenting a 6-inch, garage setback or something, and it gets brought up, she'd say, any questions? We'd say no, and Jeff would say, I make a motion to approve it, boom, you move on. I mean, I don't think it has to be perceived as cumbersome. Okay, I'll shut up now.
No, you're making good arguments. These are good arguments. Any other comments or thoughts? Commissioner Scheer.
Well, I'm starting to be persuaded by Commissioner Brown, and I would point out.
Don't give him more weight just because he's.
I would point out to all the members here that if we're concerned about our time, we would all lose 4 zoning board meetings under that scenario that we currently are attending. We are now used to having our mid-monthly meeting, which will at some point hopefully phase out.
Sooner, hopefully.
Sooner, hopefully, than later. So I think it's not beyond the pale to think that we could work that into our schedule in some format or another, be it a separate meeting or be it some additional an hour or something preceding this meeting.
Makes sense. Other thoughts? I mean, this has basically been our theme on this one, and we've hit on about all of these over the course of this discussion. They all have merit. And I think that's part of why we ended up where we ended up, is maybe that just felt easier, that we just kind of see what happens. But there is a certain argument for, if we're going to make a change, now is a pretty good time to make that change as well. Commissioner Staunton.
So let me see if I'm understanding where the consensus is developing at.
From the right, are you talking?
From that side. That the Planning Commission would act as the Zoning Board of Appeals, that we would eliminate the existing panels, and that on commercial development applications, we would have whatever we currently have, an automatic or a staff-driven automatic appeal to the City Council if there was another component of it. Well, I'd make that motion then.
Second.
Are we not going to let Commissioner Brown make any fun motions?
I
Okay.
persuaded Nancy, that's all, man.
That'll go on the record. So, let me get this straight. We have a motion to make the Planning Commission the Zoning Board of Appeals, to eliminate the existing panels as they exist, and that we would continue we probably wouldn't change the ordinance language then that automatically appeals on commercial development projects that decision to the council. And we have a motion by Commissioner Staunton and a second by, was it Commissioner Grable? Any discussion? Commissioner Scheer.
One thing I would point out that does really appeal about this is the simplicity from the presenter's perspective. I really think one of the things we've talked a lot about in our mid-month meetings is streamlining this from the public's perspective. And this process is very streamlined and very clear, and it would really minimize the number of meetings that a presenter would have to attend. And I like that. I find that very appealing from the public's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Carrie.
I would just throw out there, assuming the council accepts the recommendation and the Planning Commission becomes the Zoning Board of Appeals, I would suggest we probably, given Krummenacher, and we're not reviewing a lot of variances, we would start out with the 1 meeting a month, but we would likely have to transition then, should something happen with Krummenacher, into 2 meetings a month.
Well, I think the assumption that has to go along, assuming this motion passes, the assumption is that we're going to ultimately end up with 2 meetings a month. And that would allow the citizens to come, they're never going to have to go more than a couple weeks to get there. And we can certainly, I would assume, take on, a fair number of these if we have a dedicated meeting to it. Because right now, I know staff is trying to parcel these out and spread them amongst the panels, but,
Consider a consent agenda.
well, how would you do a consent agenda if we're actually hearing the?
You could, Planning Commission could, for the more routine variances, put those on a consent agenda, and if anybody wanted to pull them from consent, have a discussion, we could do that.
I see. So you're reviewing them prior to the meeting, and you're feeling comfortable that there's
Yeah,
no.
it's still on the agenda.
I see.
Reports are given to you as normal. You might just announce what the variance is, see if anyone wants to speak to it, and you could just pass it in one motion if there are multiple.
Okay. Others, Commissioner Grable.
Having supported this, now I have a question about it. So suppose we go to 2 meetings a month. Are they going to be 2 meetings of the Planning Commission with zoning appeals thrown in, or is one meeting going to be a zoning board meeting and one meeting going to be a Planning Commission meeting? How would you foresee that?
I would foresee it as they would be together. You could have a variance on either agenda. Again, it makes for that convenience for the resident who is in somewhat of a hurry and they want to get on the next available agenda. It might be 2 weeks away, rather than having to wait a whole month. So we would have variances on both agendas.
So one option is on the agenda, early in the agenda, you have variance requests, and so you do it all as a Planning Commission. The other option is we talked about this at our last meeting, is that sometimes a city council will meet as an economic development authority or an HRA, then they open that meeting and close it, and they open up their city council meeting. We could do the same thing. We could, on each meeting, start the meeting as the Zoning Board of Appeals, do our business, close the meeting, open a Planning Commission meeting. Either one, we might just want to talk to Roger and see how he would recommend we do that. Sure. It would be a little awkward when you get to the commercial development reviews. We'd have to, if that's the way we do it, then we have to parcel it out and bring it in under one meeting and, whatever, we'd figure that out. Yeah.
I would see it as you're the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Planning Commission. It's just all put together on the same agenda.
And then just manage it through the agenda. Yeah. Other comments? All right. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. See, I knew there would be a twist tonight. I knew it wouldn't go exactly as... The next item is the role of the Energy and Environment Commission in the development review process. This one was a fairly short discussion. We talked about whether or not the Energy and Environment Commission should have a role in the development review process. We decided that that wouldn't be beneficial. Similar to the Transportation Commission discussion, they're really the forward-thinking, planning for the future, all of that, and not so much about reviewing individual projects. And that's been our recommendation, and we've just been sort of holding it. So I would put forward that the recommendation is that they will not have a role in the development review process. Any discussion? Then I would take a motion.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second to not have the Energy and Environment Commission involved in the development review process. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is the Heritage Preservation Board. Carrie, do you want to give a little explanation on this one?
Certainly, this came up as an issue the issue is what comes first, the certificate of occupancy or the variance. There was certificate of appropriateness. This issue came up with a driveway width variance, which should come first. And the recommendation from the Zoning Ordinance Committee at the work session last week was to have the Heritage Preservation Board review the certificate of appropriateness first, it gives them more authority in being able to say no to a project based on the height, mass, and scale. If a variance has already been approved, say by the Planning Commission, then they have to review it in the context of the variance has been received, and they're just working out the details of the home. It doesn't give them it gives them a little bit more authority to say no to a project based on height, mass, and scale. The second issue that was talked about is in regard to side yard setbacks. The Heritage Board has expressed some concern about the inability to build a colonial-style home in the Country Club District based on our requirement for increased setback based on a building height of over 15 feet. Setback needs to be increased. The recommendation by the group at the work session was to pull that item aside, put it into the bucket list as a separate item. And what I might suggest is, and Chair Fisher and I had discussed this, that maybe this become an item for a topic for discussion at our February work session. We could refer it to the Heritage Preservation Board to get a specific recommendation from them, and maybe a finding from Robert Vogel also as to the appropriateness and importance of colonial-style housing in the district. So with that, I can throw it back to the Planning Commission for more discussion.
Carrie, are you suggesting, should we make a recommendation potentially at this meeting tonight to refer that to the Heritage Preservation Board?
We could do that.
And that way we could move it along just a little bit.
Yeah, the Heritage Board meets on February 8th, and then we have our work session on February 9th, so we can present their findings that night.
Okay. Or at least some results of what they discussed or where they want to go with it. All right. So I guess the first, is there any discussion about this? I think we're pretty much in agreement after a brief discussion that our recommendation still makes sense. That when looking at the chicken or the egg, we're definitely going egg first. So, so I would take a motion to that effect, recommending. Let's see. Whoops. I'm looking for the final recommendation. Essentially, that when a variance is required in a country club or other Edina Heritage Landmark District that also requires a certificate of appropriateness, that the Heritage Preservation Board should hear the COA application prior to variance review by the Zoning Board of Appeals.
So moved.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Are we doing more than just referring it to them for comment back to us?
No, that is a separate discussion on the side yard setbacks.
Okay.
What I want to do is make a recommendation that, and Carrie, help me out here. If we make this recommendation, how does this get, is this just a staff level deal? Is it just that, I mean, if we no longer have, I mean, if things move forward and the council actually agrees with our recommendations, we are going to be the Zoning Board of Appeals. So that'll be a little easier. We will all understand the order that's supposed to be. Clearly, staff will understand. They can make the appropriate recommendations to folks that come in. So, I mean, is there any, how would that be documented formally?
For the Heritage Board to review a certificate prior to the...
Yeah, I mean, does this show up someplace so it's kind of an indicator to folks that how they're supposed to go through this process?
It's really just a policy.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Forrest.
I think when you talk about the chicken and egg, I agree with the rationale that's been presented tonight. I think that it would not be necessary for the Heritage Board to approve the certificate of appropriateness, but they should at least hear it and have findings that can be forwarded to the variance board. If it's, I don't anticipate there's going to be a lot of this, but at least the application has been presented to the Heritage Board, depending on the timing, of course, with the 60-day rule and all. But that they, if they're, for some reason, they really want to see the whole package with whatever variances are approved prior to their final COA approval, then they would have that option. They could handle that procedurally at their meeting. But I agree with the part of, having those findings available for whoever's reviewing the variances.
So in the scenario you're just discussing, it's conceivable that the Heritage Preservation Board could send it'd be essentially approved pending final review after the in other words, the Zoning Board of Appeals would understand that the Heritage Preservation Board is in agreement with this general direction, so there would make sense to then grant a variance knowing that, it may go back to them.
I can see where that,
Okay.
it would depend on how they procedurally saw it, but I just wouldn't want to put things in such stone as far as this decision must be made before this decision, that should they want to review the entire project, which currently they need a final plan, just as we do for other development issues, without knowing one way or the other, then they have that option if they think it's necessary.
Okay. Commissioner Schroeder?
Mr. Chair, did you make a motion?
I didn't.
Were you framing a motion?
We have a motion and a second.
Well, in what you framed, I think you were reading from an earlier version of notes, and it's different than the version that we have in front of us. The motion, or the description that you read, refers to the country club or other Edina Heritage District. And we also have certificates of appropriateness for an individual building that may not be in a district. And so I think if we go back to the language, it's actually in the notes that were provided to us tonight. It gives us a little more flexibility on applying it to any place a certificate of appropriateness is required.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm just trying to find it.
So I should amend my motion to state that when a project requires both a certificate of appropriateness and a variance, the Heritage Preservation Board will hear the certificate of appropriateness first and forward their findings to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Now that's a good motion. So do we still have a second? Was that Commissioner Risser? Okay.
No, I just, Commissioner Forrest really agrees to the formation and everything.
You want to second the motion and then have discussion?
Yeah. Okay, I second.
So we have a motion and a second. Now, some discussion.
It sounds it seems as if this is a logical approach to take, and it does seem important to have the order happen in this manner. However, it does seem as if it is going in the opposite direction of what we just did to try to simplify things. And so that is what I am kind of thinking about right now. And so in keeping with the overall theme of tonight, I'm just wondering how this fits in. Except they do need to have the certificate of appropriateness, so that does have to happen. So it is a bit different. So anyway, my wishy-washy support for this is...
This discussion went around a little bit the other night, and it's interesting. You can get into that discussion, and where we ended up again. It took a while to remind ourselves how we ended up at that the first time. And I think when you think through it, to allow a variance and to not even know if it's an appropriate solution for that building or that neighborhood seems really premature and very difficult to do. And it's difficult both ways, but it seems a little bit better by having the Heritage Preservation Board take it first.
Right.
Commissioner Forrest.
Well, I do like the wording of Nancy's wonderful motion where she said forward their findings. So it may be a yea or nay on the COA, or it may be tabled pending the variance decisions. So I like that.
But at least it gives direction to the
Right,
Zoning Board
right.
of Appeals.
Which will now be us.
Yep. What do you think? I'm not sure.
Think how good you'll get it.
What do you think it should be? Commissioner Staunton.
Do we know, and maybe Commissioner Forrest can chime in on this, do we know how the Heritage Preservation Board feels about this? Whether they care which order it's in?
I can't speak to that so much, except that in general, before providing a COA, we need the final plan, and that they need to build according to what gets approved that night. But this would allow them procedurally to either, approve pending variance or perhaps as it was presented, or table it until they get the final variance or whatever. It is kind of a chicken and egg thing, like you said, but I think they should be able to control some of that procedure as well when it comes to approving the COA. I know staff may have another opinion on that, I'm not sure.
Commissioner Scheer.
Having served 2 years on the Heritage Board and then also on the zoning boards, I guess I have to say, Mr. Chair, that I concur with your last statement. It's not perfect either way, but I think it's extremely awkward to be granting a variance on a heritage property and not know what the opinion is of the Heritage Preservation Board before you grant that. And that's sort of where I'm falling this evening.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. So the next topic is public hearings. Carrie, do you want to give an overview of that one?
Yeah, this is one that Commission touched on a little bit earlier this evening. Currently, both the Planning Commission and City Council hold public hearings, and in our discussions, in our work sessions previously, the Planning Commission's been leaning toward the recommendation for one public hearing and that be held with the Planning Commission. At the work session, the group asked staff to contact the city attorney and put together a list of some of those reasons why it's important for one public hearing. And staff has done that in the memo that was handed out this evening, and I'll just quickly go through those. First, it streamlines the process. It's less cumbersome for applicant and residents with one hearing. We've heard that complaint from residents that they're confused which hearing should they go to, should they attend both. In most cities, the Planning Commission hold the official public hearing. All official evidence should be introduced before the Planning Commission makes findings of facts and recommendations to the City Council. Also concern in meeting the 60-day rule, potential for issues there when 2 public hearings are required. There is a potential for mistakes in notification when 2 hearings are held. Mistakes can invalidate hearings. There's also the money issue with postage and sending out notice for 2 public hearings. And also, if the council chooses, they can still take public input. Wouldn't necessarily be holding the public hearing, but they can still take public input and comments on a project. They wouldn't have to hold the formal hearing. Length of council meetings potentially could be reduced as well. So those were some of the findings that we came up with, the city attorney and I. And with that, I can open it up for discussion.
So at our work session last week, we entertained Commissioner Staunton's idea of, Commissioner Staunton wasn't able to be there, but he conveyed the idea, so we brought it up for discussion about just starting a public hearing at the Planning Commission and then holding it over for the City Council meeting. So you have one public hearing, it just runs over the span of the Planning Commission and a City Council meeting. And this idea that you try to figure out a way to communicate to the public that they should bring all the evidence, all the facts in at the first hearing or at the beginning of the hearing, and then come and do their rebuttal maybe later at the City Council. As we discussed it, that's, we're trying to, I mean, we know the City Council really would like to keep at least what they're calling a public hearing at the council meeting. What I don't know, because we haven't had that direct conversation, is are they really saying they don't want to give up taking the public input? And I don't think any of us are suggesting they not take public input. I mean, they're a city council, they should take public input, but there's a difference. An official public hearing where you take evidence, testimony, and all of that, and then make your findings based on that, really needs to happen before we make our findings. And so, as we discussed that, it really came down, we just need to give a recommendation of what we think is the best process for the city for, a number of reasons. And Roger and Carrie outlined them in this memo. So with that, I'll take any discussion. Commissioner Staunton.
Carrie, I'm curious as to whether the city attorney expressed any preference for either having the public hearing continue in front of the city council or closing the public hearing at the planning commission and just taking public comment. I mean, the distinction I see is that in the event that there was some new information that came to the council as part of the public comment they're taking, you would want it technically to be part of the public hearing because that is the record. On the other hand, you're trying to encourage people to submit all that evidence at the planning commission. I'd prefer that. But I'm just wondering if the city attorney had any thoughts on which way to kind of characterize it.
Yeah, we did have a discussion on that, and he was thinking of it in terms of should there be a lawsuit, and is it better to have one official record? And his take on it was whether the planning commission is the only one that holds a public hearing and the city council doesn't, all that information that's submitted at the city council, whether it's part of a public hearing or not, ends up being part of the official record as part of any lawsuit. So he didn't show any preference one way or the other.
He didn't care too much how we characterize it.
Right.
Okay.
Commissioner Grable.
I'd be concerned about the idea of having a public hearing held over with two different bodies evaluating what's being said. You know, if you want to have two official, if you want to have a public hearing at the commission and a public hearing at the council, then have two public hearings. But I kind of favor the idea, let's have one here and then the council can take public comment if it wishes or not. So, Mr. Brown.
I am a staunch supporter of having one meeting at the planning commission level. I think there has to be a discipline in the development process. There has to be, you know, the heavy lifting gets done by this commission. They hear that information, and I think to the extent that there's any perception that there's really going to be a public hearing or, you know, we're going to carry it over for the public to the council, people are going to save their ammunition for the second meeting, and that's not an effective use of the council's time. It's not the role of what this body is, in my opinion. And this is where the heavy lifting really ought to be done. And those findings and recommendations should come forward, and then they get to weigh that information. I think this is great, actually. Going to one meeting at the planning commission level.
Well, if I were you, I'd be making that motion. Commissioner Carpenter.
I agree completely with what Commissioner Brown was saying. I go, and Commissioner Grable as well, I go a step further. When you talk about having public hearings at two different bodies, maybe this is what was inferred or intended when you made those comments, but if you have the public hearing at both bodies, and you're a resident with a complaint, which public hearing are you going to attend? It's pointless to come and attend the planning commission public hearing. Why not just go directly to the city council public hearing and make your case against the people who are going to be making that decision? Well, if we have public hearings at two different bodies, we're going to end up with a situation where the role that we will be performing will essentially reduce itself to potentially functionally nothing, and the city council hearing will probably be the one that gets loaded up with all of the testimony. It kind of takes what we're proposing to do and flips it right over on its head. So from that perspective, along with everything else, I think it just makes abundant sense for us to do what Commissioner Brown was referring to as the heavy lifting, and to take that testimony here, make the findings, and then make a recommendation to the city council.
I have to agree, and I would also add that I think saying that maybe we will have hearings that carry over is much more confusing than saying that there will be two separate hearings, because it implies that all of the arguments that are made in front of planning will somehow magically get before city council. It opens up a lot of questions, I think. You know, if you're saying you have a public hearing that will carry over to the next meeting, does that mean only people who have presented get to continue, or, you know, what exactly does that mean? So I guess I would agree that the hearing should take place in front of the planning commission, but also add the idea of a carryover is more confusing than two separate hearings.
Other comments? Commissioner Carpenter.
Just to make sure I'm not sure if I made myself clear on my opinion on this, but I'm advocating specifically for a public hearing only at the Planning Commission, not a continued hearing and not a second hearing at the City Council.
Is that a motion?
Oh, you gotta make the motion. You have to make this one. I want Commissioner Brown to work a little bit tonight.
Come on, I've been working. Where's the language he was using for that? Is that?
You know, I don't think we actually had language. You're on your own. Absolutely. Commissioner Scheer.
I'd like to ask Commissioner Carpenter, it would not preclude, even if we adopted that as the working process, it wouldn't preclude the council if it chose to take some comments on an evening when this came before them fully approved.
No, I don't think it would preclude that, but I would make the additional comment that the more the City Council does that, the more they're likely to encourage attendance on what the public may view as a quasi-public hearing, to make those appearances and articulate their positions there. I think that the council would be better off, and I think we'll be better off, if we have a fairly clean demarcation line so that everybody knows what they're supposed to do and adds the greatest value in terms of time and mental contribution. I think it just gets much more confusing the more we muddle it and mix it all together.
I absolutely concur, but I think it requires a lot of discipline on everybody's part.
Understood.
Commissioner Forrest. Oh, I'm sorry.
I concur with Commissioner Brown when you talk about, again, discipline, the fact that there are times it feels like we're the practice run for the proponent of a development project, and that we don't get the same information later that the council hears, even though it's at the same step of the process, say preliminary or final. And it's a little bit confusing, I think, well, even for us, to see why did they make this decision? Oh, you know, when we recommended this and had these great findings or whatever, well, they had other information that we didn't have at that step. And I think the cleanliness of it all, and as he said, the discipline that would then be required that of the proponents would be of benefit too.
Commissioner Brown.
I'll make a motion to eliminate the City Council from holding public hearings on development issues, and that there be one public hearing which is held by the Planning Commission.
So we're making a motion to have one public hearing at the Planning Commission level.
Correct.
On development review. So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The last item was a topic that came up when one of our citizens brought it up at one of our open meetings early in the process, and that is to hold a special developer meeting and have a list of conditions required by the city. And where we really are is that, you know, we've refined, we have had that process. The staff does meet with developers. They do a pretty good job of it. And we've actually added a few nuances through the language as we worked on PUD and others, you know, how, you know, we massage the whole text around sketch plan review, neighborhood meetings, all of that is related to that. So our feeling was we don't really have any more work or any changes we need to make to that at this time. Any other discussion on that, or I would take a motion?
Second.
So the motion is to do nothing different than what's in the ordinance right now. And we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So I believe that is the end of our old business. Next item is community comment. Does anybody have comments to make? Seeing none, we're done with community comment. Intergovernmental business, we have a council connection. Any updates from our commission folks? Commissioner Risser.
The Energy and Environment Commission created a new working group, and that is the working group for air. And I am heading that up. I was appointed to Energy and Environment. Again, I got reappointed. And so we're really excited about that. Now we have 4 working groups, one focused on renewable energy, another on solid waste, one on water, and one on air. So really we kind of have earth, air, wind, fire. And I'm air.
Yeah, excellent. Just so everyone understands, one of the changes, I mean, Commissioner Risser, when she brought up this issue of, it being, when you're really trying to do a great job on 2 commissions like Energy and Environment and Planning Commission, it's a lot of work. As others, Commissioner Brown, Commissioner Schroeder, who have been on other commissions, Commissioner Forrest, a number of you have actually been dual commissioners, and it's the council has moved toward not having the dual commissioner role anymore. So moving forward, we're not going to necessarily have any liaison updates because we're not going to be on dual commissions. We're just going to be on the Planning Commission. So as of right now, I don't believe we have anybody on, well, certainly not on Energy and Environment. We don't have anyone on Transportation. We don't have anyone on any other commission right now. So that is a change moving forward. I think, this is just my opinion right now based on some of the discussions I've been part of, that I can see us heading toward more of what Commissioner Risser was just talking about, these subgroups. So you might imagine an initiative being forwarded by the Transportation Commission where they'll be asking for a member of the Planning Commission, asking for a member of Health and others to sit in for a limited period of time on certain studies. And I think that's where we're going to be heading, rather than, being a dual member of another commission, indefinitely. Any other updates for that? The next meeting date, our zoning ordinance update meeting, is February 9th, unless you hear otherwise. And the next regular Planning Commission meeting is February 23rd. Commissioner Staunton?
Maybe, I'm just thinking back on the chronology. I don't think we've updated the Planning Commission on the Grandview's small area guide process. You may remember we made a presentation to the Planning Commission at our November meeting.
Oh, you're right.
But we didn't have a December meeting. We did meet with the City Council at their second meeting in December, and they did approve the final plan and adopted all 4 recommendations. And the other big news is the Metropolitan Council has approved a Livable Communities grant of $100,000 to work on the small area plan. And so we're going to pivot to what to do next on that whole process. And more to come.
Yeah, that's really excellent news, and that will be moving forward. So with that, before we adjourn, I just wanted to take a few minutes, since we're way ahead of schedule. Thank you, by the way. We really moved through those quite well tonight. Commissioner Risser, we were talking about this. You've been on the commission about 3 or 4 years?
Before. It has been so enjoyable, it's hard to track.
So what I wanted to do is ask each of you to just, if you want to make any comments, your last chance at the mic on the Planning Commission. And if you've had, I'd be curious if there's a single project or something that we've done in your time on the commission that you're particularly stands out, you're particularly proud of, or just stands above the rest. I'd be curious what that would be, if any.
Well, I kind of want Commissioner Brown to go first.
He has a lot more years to go back and think about. It's not a mandatory
Okay.
answer.
Well, actually, I am very proud about, or pleased that we did get the driveway width addressed. And I think, you could talk about a really big, noticeable project, but I think the implications of that for residents and also for groundwater are significant. And so that makes me really happy, especially, having the materials change was something that I think is going to really have a strong improvement for our city. And so, it's those little things that can resonate throughout the city. And I think it's also the things that involve residents that are most important to me. So that was a significant thing. And then also having the chapter on the environment included in the comprehensive plan, because we didn't have to do that, but we did it. And that was, I think, something to really sort of underscore. So it's good to have a chance to note that. Yeah.
That's good. Commissioner Brown, how about you?
I don't know about any specific project. I would tell you that for me, the process that this commission has engaged in has probably been the most rewarding. I've enjoyed. I'm having a hard time believing that it's been 11 years that I've been on the commission, and I look at the people that I've had the privilege and the opportunity to work with, and I would say the spirited, respectful discussion that's occurred, and I think the city's the beneficiary of that, and I feel like I'm leaving the planning commission in extremely good hands with the people that are here. I'm sure you'll fill the vacancies with other people that will be as qualified or more qualified, and I think one of the stuff that we're doing tonight, as Julie kind of said, it's the stuff that's going to kind of change for the future and make it easier for the public to understand, and those are not necessarily projects in themselves, but their process. I think they're going to benefit the community long term, and I've enjoyed every minute that I've been on the commission, and frankly wish we didn't have term limits, but that's all I'll say.
You want to make another recommendation before
No.
you?
I think it's nice that Steve and I are retiring at the same time because it brings some balance or maintains some balance. I don't think if one of us dropped off and the other did not.
You know, it's funny. It's funny you bring that up because I have to tell you, when I first started on the planning commission, I was sitting on the far left, and then you were sitting on the far right. So it was left and it was right. And I swear we never agreed on anything. It was always, for whatever reason, we had opposite opinions on all of these projects. And I just kept looking over like, who is that? You know? And over the years, we gradually worked to the middle. And so here we are, we're sitting in the middle, and we agree on a lot of things.
I just have to get close to you to persuade you.
So, and that's what I keep wondering. It's like, what happened? You know, I keep thinking he changed. I changed him, and I'm thinking, or. Oh no, you know, it didn't even dawn on me that maybe he's caused me to change. So it's been fun, and I've really learned to respect you a lot, and it's been a good run. And you know, we'll miss both of you, and you've both been great contributors on the planning commission.
You guys are going to have some interesting projects to deal with in the next few years, that's for sure.
Are you going to bring some doozies or what?
I just think with the whole, just the Southdale situation and Pentagon Park, there's going to be some pretty critical pieces of real estate that are going to they're going to require, I think, creativity and leadership, and some of that's going to start right here on this bench, so do good.
Well, it's been nice working with everyone. It really has. And I will miss this, but we'll be focused on energy, and we'll probably come before you. So we'll maintain that kind of.
We'll see you.
Yes, we'll see.
All right.
It's not goodbye.
Well, with that, I would take a motion for adjournment.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.